everyone, and welcome to the Debrief on ABC News Live. I'm Kimberly Brooks. Thanks so much for joining us. We have our eye on Hurricane Dorian, and we're going to be giving you the latest storm track. Plus, we're checking in on the 2020 candidates and their views on climate change. Plus, it's back to school time, even for the Royals. But first, here are your headlines.
A wildfire in Riverside County, Southern California, has exploded in size. Local residents were ordered to evacuate as nearly 1,000 acres burned.
California's governor declaring that state of emergency for 2 California counties. The Cranston fire exploding in the last 24 hours, forcing thousands to evacuate. This fire has raced down the hillside behind me. It's being fueled by this bone-dry brush and these scorching temperatures. You can hear a tree going up behind me. It is 110 degrees out right now. It's not showing any signs of letting up.
We were so afraid this was going to happen.
Authorities say the fire was deliberately set, arresting 32-year-old Brandon McGlover overnight. He's now charged with 5 counts of arson.
And I'm glad they caught him when he did, because he had intentions to keep going.
Cranston fire now one of 6 burning in California. The Carr fire near Redding, now 20,000 acres. And near Yosemite, the Ferguson fire charring more than 43,000 acres. Parts of that park still closed.
The highest-paid actress in Hollywood is defending Woody Allen. Scarlett Johansson, who's been in 3 Allen films, including Match Point, tells The Hollywood Reporter that she'd work with Allen again. She loves him, and she believes him when he says he didn't molest his daughter, Dylan Farrow. Many in Hollywood have distanced themselves from Allen since the accusations.
Nearly a dozen women now coming forward saying they too were sexually harassed by opera star Placido Domingo. This after a report where several women told the AP that he touched them inappropriately, badgered them for private meetings, and then sometimes retaliated when they said no by damaging their careers.
We begin with Hurricane Dorian. We've been keeping you updated with full on-the-ground coverage, and we continue today a long-lasting storm, no doubt. Dorian now increasing again to a Category 3 overnight, with its effects already being felt in South Carolina. And I'm joined by our ABC meteorologist, Greg Dutra. So glad you're here. Greg, it was a Category 2. Now it's back to a Category 3, crawling.
It is crawling, and just over the last 2 minutes, because it was barely a Category 3, got knocked back down to a Category 2. It was only a Category 3 by 1 mile per hour, but it seems like this thing has been around forever, doesn't it?
It's the slowest lasting storm in the history of storms, it feels like.
And we are starting to feel some of those effects up and down the coast, especially on the eastern seaboard. Now, north through the next couple of days, that's when we're going to start seeing the major effects, especially through the next 24-hour period. So let's head on over to the maps. I'm going to show you. Again, this just came in literally while we were starting off the show, down back to a Category 3, or 2 rather, from a Category 3 with winds that are at 110 miles per hour. And it is starting to get more of a move on, 8 miles per hour off to the north. And as this does move up the coast, look what it's doing with some instability through North Carolina. We are getting these red boxes, which indicate that there are active tornado warnings. One near Wilmington, rather, and another up near Goldsboro. And those are going to be one of the main concerns with the outer bands of the hurricane. And then as the hurricane tracks closer and through North Carolina, and that'll be today into tonight, we're going to have to deal with the storm surge and also the increase in winds. That tornado threat will kind of fall by the side. Let's take a look at those winds. Hurricane warnings, they stretch all the way from south to Charleston up through the Outer Banks. Wind speeds getting up to hurricane strength rather in Charleston. This is at 5 o'clock this evening. We'll roll it forward getting into late tonight, and that is where I think some of the highest winds will be felt as this very closely scrapes the coast here near Wilmington, where wind speeds could be close to 90 miles per hour. That's, I think, the best chance of landfall you just saw on the Outer Banks, kind of near Morehead City. And then it continues up on off to the north and east. And as it does so, it starts to weaken. It's getting at higher latitudes. It's getting into some colder water, and it loses some of the fuel that it has been using through the last couple of days. Wind speeds will start to drop, and we may even see some of the scattered showers from the outer bands as far north as Long Island. New York City could deal with some rain Friday and into Saturday.
My goodness. All right. So as Greg just showed you, Dorian is beginning to lash South Carolina, with all commercial airlines stopping flights at Charleston International Airport, flash flooding and thousands of power outages across the state. So I want to go to Ann Emerson right outside of Charleston and Sullivan Island, South Carolina, with the latest. Ann?
Here on Sullivan's Island, and we have been taking lashing from these winds coming through and it's really started to pick up this morning. I want you to see what's going on out here. As far as the coast goes, we have seen some enormous waves rolling in. I was sending out some tweets this morning to kind of show you what's been going on. Now, what is impressive is this boardwalk has stayed clear, at least all the way out to the water, right out to the dunes. And so we've been able to see the boardwalk, which is fantastic. But the water, the wind, it just keeps on coming through. Now, I've also been keeping a very close eye on the roofs around here and the trees. I have seen a few broken tree limbs. I haven't seen any trees down yet in this area. I know we're still taking a lot of wind and rain, and the force of it is still coming here. But just to get an idea of, you can see the sheets of rain coming through, and you can see how it's really just bending everything in sight. But we've been here all evening, all through the entire night. I'll tell you one thing that I did feel that was extraordinary was actually you could feel as big gusts came through, you could actually feel the house move a little bit. So it was very, it was very real all night long. We knew that we were in the middle of a major storm out here, and we're keeping an eye on it. We'll be reporting from here so you can sort of see what's happening out on the beaches and what the erosion is starting to look like as we progress through this storm. Ann Emerson on Sullivan's Island, back to you.
All right, thank you, Ann. And Greg, I just want to ask you, this is hurricane season, but is any of what's happening abnormal to you?
Yeah, I think over the last few years, seeing so many hurricanes from 2016 to 2019, it's been the longest span of Category 5 hurricanes that we've seen consecutively since we've been looking at hurricanes.
All right, so we're going to head a little bit north. We have Gloria Rodriguez from our ABC affiliate WTVD on the ground in Wilmington, North Carolina. Gloria, Hurricane Dorian bringing a literal tornado this morning, correct?
You're absolutely right. We've gotten reports of several tornadoes between here and Morehead City, and we are starting to see some more rain here, some more wind in Wilmington, North Carolina. Now, where we are right now is downtown area. Most of the businesses here are closed today as they prepare for the hurricane, and people are riding out the hurricane. This is one of the few businesses we've seen that's actually open right now. This is called the Gourmet Market here in downtown Wilmington. And I've talked to a few people who have been coming in. They say that they're getting their hurricane water, their food, their snacks, just in case they lose power and in case they're without food or access to stores for a few days. Now, remember, they experienced Hurricane Florence here less than a year ago, so there is a concern here about the storm surge, about flooding in this area. You'll see a lot of the businesses are boarded up. This one here says ILM strong, Wilmington strong, and over here they have some information on storm shelters, readync.gov resources for folks who may need to find shelter during the storm. Now, as far as that reported tornado, one was reported about a half hour from here in Brunswick County. The sheriff's office there posting photos of damage to homes, so we're waiting to learn more information about exactly what happened there. Kimberly, back to you.
I appreciate that. Gloria, right there in Wilmington, North Carolina. And Greg, is it normal to see tornadoes mixed with hurricanes? I mean, the hurricane is bad enough.
As if the hurricane isn't enough, right? And it is. It's totally normal to see that. You're getting a lot of spinning and swirling of the air in the lowest levels of the atmosphere, and that helps spin up these tornadoes. And while they're relatively brief, they're kind of fleeting. And on the weaker side of tornadoes, not only do you now have to deal with flooding from the rains and the storm surge, but to add a tornado threat on top of it just seems like it's adding insult to injury.
Absolutely. It's unbelievable. So, guys, if you would zoom in on a map of North Carolina, on the right of it, you would see a group of islands that look pretty vulnerable considering how strong this storm is. So, North Carolina, the governor there held a press conference this morning warning the people. So let's take a listen.
Hundreds of thousands will lose power, and that has already begun. Winds will topple trees and power lines, and roads and buildings will be flooded. I urge everyone, even those inland, to pay close attention to flood watches and warnings and be ready to evacuate if asked to by local officials.
All right, so I want to go to Stephanie Ramos, who's in the Outer Banks in North Carolina. Stephanie, what is the latest where you are? Looking pretty calm right now.
It absolutely is, Kimberly. This is literally the calm before the storm. A lovely day here, but that won't last long. There is a hurricane warning in effect along the coast of North Carolina. These barrier islands, these Outer Banks where we are right now, are really set up to face the brunt of the storm and dangerous storm surge at about 8 feet. Now here along this coastline, you can see a lot of these homes here, these beachfront homes, they have these dunes in front of them to kind of protect the home. But a lot of them, some of them have been boarded up like further up the coastline. These have their shutters on. But another concern weighing on folks is the amount of rain that may fall with this storm. About 15 inches is expected. That's what officials are saying. That colliding with the flooded areas could be devastating. And that is the main concern here from these across this area, coastal flooding that can not only be destructive, but also deadly.
And Stephanie, before we go, this same area got hit pretty hard during Hurricane Matthew. Does that affect how people prepared for this one?
Well, somewhat. A lot of people have been drawing comparisons between the two storms as Dorian gets closer. A lot of folks have been remembering Hurricane Matthew from 2016 that caused catastrophic flooding and killed dozens of people. So walking around here, we've been in this area for a little bit. It's kind of a ghost town. A lot of people have heeded those warnings, the evacuations that have been put in effect here across the Outer Banks. There are some businesses that are open, that are planning on closing later on, but for the most part, people are getting out of town. And as you said at the beginning, the governor of North Carolina held a press conference, and he said this isn't going to be a storm that just brushes by. Even if it does not come ashore, the eye of the hurricane will cause extensive damage across this area.
All right, Stephanie Ramos right there in the Outer Banks in North Carolina. Thank you so much for the updates. And Greg, what I find most surprising about all of this is that we have a storm track, but it's still pretty unpredictable.
It is. There's still little wiggles that can happen. And as she said, the storm doesn't have to move on shore to see some of the worst effects. We don't technically have to have a landfall. I was just checking the distance. It's some 20 to 40 miles off of the coast, depending on where exactly you're measuring from. And that is just about in the eye wall, just about getting close to some of the strongest winds. And that is going to be a trend that continues all the way through tonight, especially through northern South Carolina and then southern North Carolina.
And of course, the storm is moving now, but not without leaving complete devastation behind in the Bahamas. The strongest hurricane to ever hit the islands, and the prime minister now able to assess the damage and a rising death toll. Now, 20 people reported dead and many still missing. So I want to go to Marcus Moore, who has been right there the whole time and joins us from Nassau. Marcus?
Well, Kimberly, good morning. The effort to respond to this crisis in parts of the Bahamas continues today, and the Minister of National Security told us that the search and rescue efforts will ramp up today as more resources have arrived, and they're also able to reach the areas that were cut off after Hurricane Dorian made landfall. And this is a monumental effort, and we're talking about thousands of people who have lost their homes, and there's still this effort to find people who may be trapped in the rubble or who were injured. So all of this is still developing, but today marks a critical step in making progress in that. But we also know that this humanitarian crisis is unfolding. We were on the ground in Marsh Harbor this week and saw the medical clinic that was packed with storm survivors who have nowhere to go. Men, women, and children, entire families filling the hallways and all of the observation rooms at that hospital that, by the way, is continuing to treat many of the injured, but it has turned into a makeshift shelter. But there's work underway to find another location for all of those storm survivors as they face a very long road to recovery, Kimberly. The devastation at Marsh Harbor and the Abaco Islands that we've seen with our own eyes firsthand is absolutely breathtaking, and it's clear that this part of the Bahamas will never be the same. And certainly we know that the death toll has reached, as of this morning, at least 20, but officials fear it could rise. And so not only is there an economic toll, but obviously a personal one and an emotional one for so many people here in the Bahamas. Kimberly.
All right. Thank you, Marcus. Unbelievable to see that. And when you see the survivors in that shelter, it makes it all the more real. But unbelievable love and grace often come out of these tragedies. So this young boy's parents was saving up for a trip to go to Disney World. You see him right there for his 7th birthday. But instead, he had another idea. Jermaine Bell wanted to donate money to people in the Bahamas. And on top of that, he emptied his own piggy bank and bought hot dogs and chips and water to evacuees since he was in the evacuation route in South Carolina. So kudos to Jermaine. Such a good move there. Such a good kid. Amazing. So we move to Washington now, where President Trump is also, he's been tweeting quite a bit about Hurricane Dorian, but for a different reason. Should we call it Mapgate 2019? The president defending a map he showed yesterday in the Oval Office that inaccurately showed Alabama in the path of the storm. So I want to bring in Mona Kosar-Abdi at the White House. Mona, let's just talk about his forecast and this map and the way it was altered.
Well, I called it Sharpie Gate, so Mapgate, I might have to steal that one, Kimberly. But honestly, in the grand scheme of things, this doesn't seem that important, especially as Hurricane Dorian is barreling right now towards the United States. But it does seem important to President Trump to make it known why he said on Sunday that Alabama was set to be hit by the storm. So as the Carolinas prepare for Dorian to potentially make landfall, the president today tweeted in part, in the early days of the hurricane, certain models strongly suggested that Alabama and Georgia would be hit as it, being Hurricane Dorian, made its way through Florida to the Gulf. Now, the president repeatedly insisted that that was the case during a hurricane briefing on Sunday here in Washington at the FEMA headquarters, which prompted a response immediately from the National Weather Service that then tweeted, quote, Alabama will not see any impact from Dorian. We repeat, no impact from Hurricane Dorian. But then yesterday, the president created, again, what I called Sharpie Gate, but you're calling it Map Gate, when he held up a map of the national, it was a doctored map from the National Hurricane Service Center, excuse me, where you see there the cone of, I believe they call it, the cone of uncertainty, which was extended with what appeared to be a black Sharpie to, that's right, include Alabama. When asked about the revisions to the map, the president dismissed it, saying, I don't know. But, you know, it's important to note also that it is a federal crime to falsely, knowingly represent an official weather forecast. So far, the White House isn't commenting. And when we asked FEMA about it as well, they are referring all questions to the White House. But it does seem, again, in the grand scheme of things, when Hurricane Dorian is still an imminent threat, a little frivolous to be talking about a projection that happened last week.
Absolutely, Mona. And Greg, Mona, I want you to stay with us. But Greg, you were also telling us that the weather community was very upset about this.
Well, we noticed the second that it happened, that something had been changed on the map. I mean, the press conference wasn't even over yet, and we were trying to screen grab it and see what that was on the end of the track because it didn't look anything like the 5-day outlook. And, well, the reason that NOAA puts out just that 5-day outlook is because it gets really uncertain past day 5. You're talking about errors in the track that could be 300 miles wide. So that's why they limit it to 5 days. And while maybe some of the early models did show it tracking into Alabama, that was day 6, day 7, where model averages for errors are somewhere around 300 to 350 miles. So we don't want to, warn people needlessly. And you're right, this does take away from the focus of the Carolinas, where we should be focused now.
Yes, and Mona, are you still with us?
I'm right here.
Yes, I just wanted to ask you before we go, switching gears just a little bit. The president is also diverting funds again from the military funds this time to that border wall.
That's right. The Pentagon announced yesterday that the Secretary of Defense has authorized the diversion of $3.6 billion in military construction funds to be diverted to fund the president's border wall. Half of that, about $1.8 billion, will be shifted from domestic projects, the other half from overseas projects. The biggest impact is set to be felt in Puerto Rico, where about $400 million slated for military reconstruction after the devastation due to Hurricane Maria will will be diverted to the border wall. The White House says it's a matter of national security, but this has sparked bipartisan backlash. We even heard from Republican senators from Utah, Mike Lee and Mitt Romney, who said that they voiced their concerns about the president sidestepping Congress. They didn't like the fact that he bypassed Congress in order to get the funds for his wall. Democrats were a little bit more scathing in their objections. A group of senators from the Senate Appropriation Committee said that the president promised Mexico would pay for this wall, not the military and their families. Kimberly.
All right, Mona Kosar Abdi right there at the White House. Thank you for joining us. We appreciate it. And speaking of politics, Greg, climate change, a big issue. I just want to ask you, since you're covering this hurricane, do you think what's happening right now has anything to do with climate change?
Well, speaking of Category 5 hurricanes, 2016 to 2019 was the longest stretch that we've seen since we've been keeping track of hurricanes of each consecutive year having a Category 5 storm. Whether or not it made landfall doesn't matter, but they're still at least trending in the shorter term to be stronger. And then you look at other things, like just recently Denver had their first 100-degree day in the month of September, and they've been keeping records in Denver since the mid-1860s. So things seem to be warming up. Hurricanes, they respond to warmer air by becoming stronger. So warmer air, warmer water, stronger hurricanes. At least the empirical evidence is there.
All right, Greg Dutra with the updates there. But speaking of climate change, a 7-hour climate change town hall last night hosted by CNN gave 10 presidential candidates the opportunity to show where they stand. So I want to bring in our Rick Klein in our D.C. bureau. Rick, it's pretty remarkable that there's even focus on this for this long. So what were your major takeaways?
This issue has gone mainstream in the Democratic primary. It was striking to see how many areas that the candidates agreed with each other. They're racing to spend trillions of dollars to combat climate change. There's no question about the cause or the need for massive federal intervention to try to turn it around, in their view. That is striking also because it puts them so squarely at odds with President Trump, whose campaign continues to raise money off of plastic straws, among other things. The president is an avowed skeptic of climate change. There is no skepticism inside the Democratic Party. The disagreements really are just on how far you go and how much you spend to do something about it.
All right. So was there anyone that seemed like, you know, their plan was the one that people were most attracted to?
I don't think there's any way to scientifically judge based on that. I think it's telling that Jay Inslee, who put his whole campaign on climate change, got shout-outs from basically all of the candidates. And a number of candidates, Elizabeth Warren, Kamala Harris, Pete Buttigieg, they all had plans teed up and ready to go tied to this last night, knowing that it's an issue that is likely to get covered in the Democratic debate on ABC next week.
All right, and I can't leave you before we talk about Joe Biden on Colbert last night. Let's take a listen to what the former VP had to say about all of his gaffes.
In the last few weeks, you've confused New Hampshire for Vermont, said Bobby Kennedy and MLK were assassinated in the late 70s, assured us I'm not going nuts. Follow-up question, are you going nuts?
Well, look, the reason I came on the Jimmy Kimmel Show is because I'm not. I mean, any gaffe that I have made, and I've made gaffes like every politician I know has, have been not about a substantive issue, been about other. I'm trying to talk about what other people have done. I don't get wrong things like, there is, we should lock kids up in cages at the border.
So, Rick, was Biden's defense enough? Will this matter to his voters, all of these gaffes?
Humor helps, and I think poking fun at himself with that line is probably the most effective way that he can deal with it as a candidate, beyond just going out there and doing it. Look, it hasn't mattered so far to people that support Joe Biden. Anecdotally, as well as in polling, his support is basically where it's been from the start. The question rests with voters whether they believe the explanations or just frankly don't care and believe in the more broad explanation the vice president has given, that the details really don't matter nearly as much as how you're communicating, what your policies are, and what's in your heart.
All right, Rick Klein in our D.C. bureau. And of course, if you guys want to see all of these presidential candidates, you can on the debate coming up next week on September 12th in Houston. So speaking of politics that might be as crazy as the U.S., are the politics in the U.K., but maybe even more confusing, which is why I want to bring in James Longman in our London bureau with the latest on Prime Minister Boris Johnson and Brexit and his younger brother who has just quit Parliament. James, what should we know about this?
Yeah, so Joe Johnson, his younger brother, as you say, is also an MP, a politician, and part of the government, sensationally quit earlier today. He didn't just quit in quiet, though. He actually tweeted about it, and he said that there was a long-standing tension between the national interest and family loyalty, which kind of makes you think that he doesn't trust his own brother, which isn't a great message. That obviously has spread like wildfire across this country. Just in the last few minutes, actually, a newspaper, and the newspapers in this country never fail us with their headlines. Bojo, by the way, is the name we use for Boris Johnson. So a blow for Bojo as Brojo go-goes, which I thought was quite fun. It means nothing to you, but I quite enjoyed it. But the thing is, the reason why this is important is because it could precipitate other people close to Boris Johnson from quitting, other cabinet members. And so it's a great message for the opposition to use in an election, which we think is probably coming up in the next few weeks, if not months, to say, look, we can't trust Boris Johnson. If his brother doesn't trust him, we can't trust him. So this is all in the context of course, the Brexit meltdown, if you like. And the reason why this government is melting down over Brexit is because basically the Conservative Party, which is the party of government at the moment, is imploding. Because basically Brexit has come to define the party, as it has done really over the last 30 years, in this way. Basically, anyone who believes that Brexit should be no deal is really a true Conservative, and anyone who doesn't believe it should be no deal, well, they're not Conservative enough, and that's why we've seen this purge recently of these 21 MPs who were thrown out, including, by the way, Winston Churchill's grandson. The idea that Winston Churchill's grandson is not Conservative enough for the Conservative Party is an extraordinary place to be. So where are we now? Well, Boris Johnson still doesn't have a majority rule in Parliament. He's kind of boxed in this kind of perfect prison of being Prime Minister, but not actually being able to do anything, not being able to affect the processes of how this country leaves the European Union. He's going to try again to ask Parliament to allow him to have an election. That will take place on Monday. It's likely, though, that the government will lose that. Then where do we go? Well, all bets are off. It seems that there probably will be an election in the next few months. The question is whether it happens before Brexit and then we have a no deal, or after that 31st of October date, and the opposition managed to push it further forward so that this country doesn't crash out of the European Union with no deal. There is a lot to kind of get your head around, but fundamentally, Brexit has basically torpedoed our parliamentary system, and those MPs who sit in the Houses of Commons are trying to work a way forward.
All right, James, and I normally never do this, but in case somebody is just joining right at this moment, just read that headline one more time before I go.
A blow for Bojo as Brojo go-goes. I just loved it. There was also another really, really good tweet just before I do go, which another person put out saying his resignation, it must be the first time a politician has resigned to spend less time with his family, which we all enjoyed as well. So,
oh, my goodness.
This country's going crazy, Kim. And I'm just dressed up for it, so, you know, I may as well. If this country's going down the drain, then I might as well put a nice suit on.
You look fantastic, James. You look amazing. So handsome. James Longman in our London bureau, thank you so much for that. We appreciate it. And Greg, you've been with us all day. We appreciate your updates.
Thank you. I feel like he's one of the guys on the Titanic still playing a violin as the whole ship's going down. At least he looks good and people are getting good music out of it.
Absolutely. A few laughs for you guys. Continue to take care of yourselves. And if you're around, you can stick around for the briefing room at 3:30 p.m. Then check out World News Prime at 8 p.m. And if you want to stay updated on all of this hurricane coverage, you can go to abcnews.com or download the app, correct?
Yes, indeed.
Yes. We'll see you later.